This is chapter 8 and it's called Life at Sea. The big Spanish ship, which had already picked up passengers from Granada and Barbados, was like a floating skyscraper with stairs, numbers, letters and arrows pointing in every direction. On our ticket was a number and a letter which were called out, and we were told to gather together with the rest of the passengers with similar numbers. We were then taken down into the belly of the ship into a tiny cabin with 2 bunk beds and a sink in the corner. Our cases were already piled up under the small porthole. This was to be our home for over 2 weeks. We climbed into bed exhausted and fell fast asleep. The next morning, I woke up feeling as if someone had beaten me over the head. I felt dizzy and nauseous. I'd never had this feeling before. Sandra said she felt the same. We both rushed to the basin to be sick. The only relief was to stay in bed or to crawl up onto the deck and stand perfectly still while breathing in the sea air. I remember being given tomato soup and corn puffs to eat, which I was told would make me feel better, but they only made me feel even more sick. I still can't stand the sight of either. This was a disappointing start to my venture, not at all the way I'd expected it to begin. The seasickness lasted for about 4 days, and on the 5th morning I felt surprisingly better. My body and head had got used to the ship's motion. I'd gained my sea legs. Sandra still hadn't completely discovered hers. She'd been given the responsibility of looking after us and making sure we behaved. Lester and Ellington and I tended to be a little wild in celebrating our newfound freedom, and our antics made her anxious. But we weren't at all sympathetic at her predicament. We made a terrible noise and ran all over the crowded ship, exploring all 3 decks, including the shaded one where many of the passengers sat relaxing, reading and playing cards. We discovered every nook and cranny on board the ship and sometimes went into places we shouldn't have, even deep down into the 2 cargo holds which were packed with goods bound for England. There were many other children who were enjoying the freedom of the ship, and some, like us, had no adult supervision. Even though Mummy had paid the shipping company for someone to keep an eye on us, no one ever did. And as a result, sometimes things got a bit out of hand. One day, Ellington had a fight with another boy on the deck. It started off as a rough and tumble, and then it began to get out of control, and while Sandra and I pleaded for them to stop, they rolled closer and closer to the edge of the deck, nearer to the guardrail. I thought they were going to fall into the deep Atlantic Ocean, and suddenly from high above a voice called out for them to stop. It was a captain who was watching the fight from his bridge. The last thing he wanted was children overboard, but the fight still kept going. Ellington was not the sort of boy to give in. The helmsman heeled the ship sharply over, which made us feel disorientated, but still the fight kept going. And then the captain himself came down from the bridge and dragged the boys onto the deck just as they were about to fall in. He warned them both that if they couldn't behave, they would have to stay in their cabins for the rest of the voyage. Well, the experience was frightening and shook us all. And so after the atmosphere and the journey became a little more controlled, and we behaved less dangerously, although we were still very adventurous. One evening at sunset, when the sea looked like waves of liquid gold, we saw the most amazing sight. Suddenly, as if by magic, the sea erupted with hundreds of arch shapes which dived back into the water. None of us had ever seen anything like it before. And then we realised that it was a shoal of flying fish, dancing and skipping across the ocean. We watched the glittering spectacle until the sun died down and disappeared below the horizon. We became friends with the Spanish sailors who cooked the meals down in the galley, and there were hundreds of passengers on board to be fed and plenty of food to prepare. Mountains of potatoes had to be peeled every day, and the sailors entrusted us with that duty. I bet they did. At the time we thought that this was because we were their friends. It was only later that I realised that they only had us hanging around because we were doing their job for them. Each day, a diet of soup, tasteless meat or fish with a little flavour, and potatoes was served up. Although we helped prepare it, we didn't eat it. I think we mostly lived on bread, water and canned fruit, the only food that we actually found edible. The adults all seemed to enjoy being on the ship. They were always laughing and having fun. For them, it was like being on a cruise. They were all accustomed to hard work, working hard for a living, and for 2 weeks they had all the food, drink and nightlife they wanted. And at night we used to sneak up on deck in our pyjamas and watch them dancing in the ballroom to the music. Many of the sailors also joined in with the socialising in the evening, And one night we saw one of our sailor friends hugging and kissing a lady while they were dancing. We stared wide-eyed and drop-jawed at them for a while as they smooched together. We then giggled and ran back to our cabin with our little secret. We left behind the hot tropics and entered the warm Mediterranean where we stopped off in Spain. The sailors unloaded some of the cargo that the vessel was carrying, and as we watched from the deck, I overheard some of the adults saying they wished they could go ashore and see what Spain was really like. And that's how I knew it was Spain. No one on board really wanted the voyage to end. It was a passage in time laden with freedom and happiness, free of care and responsibilities. We were journeying towards the unknown. We all had romantic visions of what it was going to be like in England, but still didn't want this part of our adventure to end. To tell the truth, I hadn't even thought of Marmee, Daddy, or seen my brother or sister in England since the start of the journey. It was only 2 or 3 days after we left Spain that these thoughts entered my head. Now everyone started talking about the big arrival, and a buzz of excitement was going around the ship. I knew we were getting closer to England because the weather started to get much, much colder, and the sun seemed to disappear under the low clouds. Marmee had written and told us that the place we were coming to was not hot and sunny like Trinidad. I now knew what she meant. Still, we kept warm by running around the ship frantically. Walking had never occurred to us. And the day before we arrived, there was an announcement that told everyone to pack their belongings. Nothing was to be left behind. We didn't have much, so it didn't take us very long. That evening, after dinner, there was a big party at which everyone celebrated the end of the voyage. Life at sea was coming to a close, but the memories of coming to England would linger forever.